Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We are here today with Dustin Cragen. Hi, Dustin, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Dustin is our special guest, and we are really thrilled to have him. So let me tell you a little bit about Dustin before we get started. He's currently the Vice President of Revenue Cycle Management Software and Services Research at CLASS, which is a world-class organization. He's been there for 3 years. Prior to joining CLASS, he worked for a healthcare provider organization for 20 years, so that's a boatload of experience. Much of that time, he led all revenue operations for the company, so that means that you have a big coat of armor.
Yeah, and some gray hair, actually, from all of that.
Exactly. That comes with the landscape, doesn't it?
Yep.
And you have a passion for improving healthcare for patients, and I guess that's really what matters. And I'm jealous. You live in Utah with your wife and your 2 daughters, and you mountain bike and do trail running and skiing and just live a great outdoor life.
Yep, it boils down to family and a few hobbies and work, and but it's a good life. So yeah, thank you.
In that order.
Yep.
In that order. First of all, tell us about CLASS, because what you do is really super important, and I think we need to set the stage with that.
Yeah, no, a great question to lead out with. So CLASS has been around for 25 years. We are healthcare specific. In other words, we're not in any other industries. And we started with the mission to really create this transparency in and around healthcare software and services. So our founder, his name is Kent Gale. Kent was a salesman for an EHR it's no longer around, but he had this concern about, you have sales teams out making promises and making statements, or organizations as well, right, about marketing and different things to the provider. But then when the providers would actually get on those software or those services, there was a little bit of a disconnect between what was happening and what was said was going to happen. And so Kent was trying to figure out, how do we create this transparency around these products so providers really know what they're getting. And so from that, CLASS was born. At this point, after 26 years, we're doing about 25,000 provider evals every single year. And these are anywhere from the CEO, CFO, in my case, a lot of VPs of rev cycle. And then we also go all the way down to the end user on software and services. We aggregate all of that. And then people know us generally that we're publishing that information.
Fantastic. So you deliver a lot of very important insights that people need to know as healthcare rolls along on this rapid train that we're all on, trying not to fall off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So you and I had a really fascinating conversation. For many years, healthcare resisted calling patients consumers. They didn't want to do that. They said they're patients. Well, they're not anymore. They're consumers. And as we all know, we have one experience out in real life, not inside a hospital, and we expect that to carry over. So that's what we want to talk about today. Tell us, first of all, what you see from your standpoint about what consumers want. Let's level the playing field here, and you tell us.
Yeah. So we have seen at CLASS, CLASS is, I like to say that we measure energy, meaning we're measuring interest and energy in different areas of healthcare. And one of the things that we've seen a tremendous amount of energy around, probably in the last 5 to 8 years, is these digital interaction tools that have up to that point had really not been around. I think historically, all of us who've been around long enough know you'd pick up the phone and you would call and talk to somebody at the front desk to schedule an appointment, and then everything was done in person. And it's just not the way that it is anymore. And so if you think about us as consumers, everybody on this call, we're all healthcare consumers, both for ourselves and of course our families. And it really always boils down to, in general, we want 3 primary things. So we want it to be quick, meaning we don't want to have, if we're sick, we don't want to have to wait a week to get in to see somebody. We want it easy or convenient, meaning we don't want to drive an hour and a half if we have the flu to be seen. And then, of course, I think in the last, 10 years, the rise of high deductible health plans has put a lot of responsibility on cost and controlling costs. And so we also want it inexpensive, or at least as cheaply as possible without sacrificing quality. And so to that end, as other industries have, I think, clearly surpassed healthcare, there's been a lot of external pressures, like, retail, or like, I'll give you an example. I know even with my kids today, they ordered from school, they ordered sandwiches from the local sandwich shop right online. I know that like group fitness is scheduled online, haircuts, everything, so we're just accustomed to being able to interact with these service providers online, and healthcare really should, but it should be no different. And it is different still today, but it's becoming less and less, I don't know if acceptable is the word, but there is definitely pressure for healthcare to get caught up.
Do you think realistically patients believe that their Amazon, their Google, their online, their Old Navy, their all of those experiences, that the physician's office should be no different than that?
Yeah, we do. So we just did a huge publication or a report recently where we spoke to, it was like 13 or 14,000 consumers of healthcare. And what's really interesting is, especially among that demographic of like 18 to 34 years old, there's no question that they expect to be able to take care of all of these things digitally. And then when you look at also concurrently what happened during the COVID period, most people, including myself, by the way, I had never done a telehealth or a virtual visit before COVID. I don't know why. I think when I was sick, my default setting was always to call my provider and go in and see him. Well, we just obviously saw that go right through the roof, the usage. Now that's kind of pulled back a little bit, but it's stayed very high and I did it a couple of times. And now, unless I need a diagnostic, me personally, I don't use anything but virtual. And to me, that's becoming the new norm. So I'm not sure that my experience is probably any different than a lot of people who are like, oh, this is pretty good. This is a good way of going about things. And so I think we are seeing that shift in healthcare. And now it's on the responsibility of the providers to get caught up.
So I always found this dichotomy. My experience interacting with physicians was marketing and public relations and advertising. And when I would come up with an idea and they would resist, I would say, well, go home and think about how you interact and the messages that are tracked. So there's this dichotomy in how they think between what should happen with their practice and what they do in real life. So what do you see as the resistance? First of all, you've called this a digital front door. So where exactly is the resistance with providers to a digital front door, which they themselves use every day?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that question. One, I just think in general, people and almost I think physicians, a lot of people look at themselves as kind of small business owners. They like to do things a certain way. I think they like a form of control to their life. And I understand it because I want the same thing. So that's not an indictment on any level. But I think part of that is the slow to change and to adopt to external forces, because why, in your mind, why change something that seems to be working? And therein, I think, is part of that equation. But speaking of digital front door, I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge that term is pretty broad and gets interpreted or at least defined very differently among providers. Class has found that in general, I think the most people define digital front door as really searching for and accessing healthcare. Now, there's others that also view that maybe that includes like the communication piece in between, with the provider, and or even like follow-up surveys or like follow-up to the care plan, like post-clinical intervention. And that could be in some instances, but when you look at really being able to search and then get and to access that healthcare, that's kind of how we look at a digital front door, at least for now, until it evolves further. So when you look at the adoption, actually, most providers have adopted some form of a digital front door in their organization. So that in and of itself, I don't think is really the issue. I think what is the issue here is what functionality is missing. And so in this report that we did, the number one thing that came out that consumers wanted by far, number one, was the ability to schedule online. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to see what availability was there, click on it and schedule that appointment. And that was the number one thing that providers actually did not have. And so there was this huge gap between what the consumer wanted and what providers were willing to do. And I think there's some strong reasons why they haven't opened up their schedule, but the scheduling, rescheduling, that seems to be really what we're talking about here, at least according to our data.
I think that's the one, I think probably of anything, that's the one area of a practice that gives a provider confidence and comfort, is that they're controlling the schedule, because otherwise it will just wheel way out of control and no one will know what's going on. And that's not necessarily true, is it, in your experience with other providers who do have that?
Yeah, I don't know if we're far enough to, or we have enough data points to really know that. You're right in that if you think about, if you're a cardiologist, do you really want someone coming in and just grabbing like 2 hours of your time? Or do you at least want to vet who is grabbing your time? Because on the other side of all of that equation is revenue optimization on behalf of the providers that already have pretty low margins. And so they really are kind of scheduling it for revenue maximization. And so to feel like suddenly I've lost control of that, I could see why it's not even an unfounded fear. I mean, I think you have to really, consider that. Where I think, Deborah, we will figure out as an industry though is, okay, well then what filters or what parameters can we put around the scheduling to kind of optimize that? But I think at the end of the day, providers are going to have to come to terms with other providers are doing it. And we do know that there's providers that are doing it. I just don't know if it's as widespread as we'd like to see it. But providers are going to have to flex in that direction. It's just what qualifications can you put around that to ensure that everybody wins?
I think that you and I discussed, the issue of patient hemorrhaging. And if you are a consumer as a patient and you are looking at physicians, and all of a sudden you come across one and they don't do text reminders and they don't have a patient portal and they don't have all these online things, do you have data that shows what the frequency is or the likelihood is that a patient will just move on and go to a practice that does have that?
Yeah, I don't think we have the overt data to say we can stand on, here's the survey and here's what they said. But we do know we have enough anecdotal evidence to know that, especially in the younger demographics that I mentioned, the kind of that 18 to 34, even a little bit more, there's a couple of forces at play there. Number one, usually they don't have significant healthcare needs. And as a result of that, their visits to a healthcare provider are generally what we would call infrequent, right? And as a result of that, they also don't have like a primary care physician. When I grew up, like we had that neighbor or that hometown doc that everybody went to, we went all saw the same doctor. And we kind of latched on to that person. Well, now that's not really something anymore where you have this PCP that you're always going to. And by the way, we also talked about the high deductible health plans. You're also going to shop a little bit more. And that's why you're seeing a big increase in the amount of private services out there. I think the other day I saw a billboard for an MRI for like $400 or something like that, where, people might actually go do a diagnostic privately and then just have the results read or something like that. So, as a result of that, the willingness to shop and to bounce around we are seeing that's increasing pretty significantly. And again, something that providers are going to have to be a little bit worried about because there are options now, especially in larger metropolitan areas.
You bring up a really interesting point in that it used to be not only that you had your own physician, but that you stayed in a job for 30 or 40 years. And now, and then it became, oh, well, you have to stay in a job for 5 years. And now it's, have you been there too? Great. Right. Yeah. That kind of,
yeah. And so even our society, we're just not as, I don't think we're as relationship driven as we were, probably, I'm talking about with providers, by the way. But yeah, I mean, even when you look at the younger demographic using phones, they're very very comfortable having these digital interactions. And then when it comes down to the actual intervention, the clinical intervention, sure, like they want that person that they connect with, et cetera. But that's not the driving force anymore.
So we have some people, we have, of course, attendees, and I want to encourage you, if you have a question, please write it into the chat and we will answer it as we go along. But what do you think, what does your crystal ball tell you? What does the immediate future hold? Let's say 2 to 3 years. What are we looking at for the evolution of this?
Yep. So there's no way we're stuffing this genie back in the bottle. So the future is there will be a point in time where we are scheduling online. We are using mobile devices for almost everything. Every vendor that I speak with and I work with, they are running to that functionality. I think the thing that's, as we've already mentioned in this discussion, it's sort of that provider mindset that's pulling on this, but we're seeing that change day by day. And so I think in a couple of years, you're just going to see increased market availability of these tools. Do I think we'll have full adoption in a couple of years? No, I think there's probably going to be some physicians or organizations that are going to not do anything until they retire and say, they're not going to mess with that. But I do think that those that are on the forefront, you're going to see mass adoption. And candidly, I just think you have to. If you don't, I do think you'll just get left behind in time, or at least from a volume standpoint, you'll always be kind of second choice to others that have provided that convenience up front.
Yeah, because as the baby boomers age out and the 18 to 35 generation becomes 45, 50, they don't know life without a cell phone or all of these other digital access points, right?
Yeah.
They just don't.
They will continue to search until they find what they're looking for, and then they will go to that person at that point.
What do you think a physician needs to adopt to remain relevant? We have mobile access, we're talking about digital front door, but what are the other pieces that are in there that you think are essential to them?
Yeah, really, really good question. I think it all goes back to those core things about being quick, about being convenient, and about being inexpensive. And if you're not able to check all of those boxes, I think people are going to find a reason not to see you. So I think we've done a pretty good job kind of talking about that digital front door, different patient engagement tools. I think anything in and around the financing piece is another. We've seen a big proliferation of the ability to finance care and to go in, because candidly, there's a lot of people that just cannot afford healthcare in this country, and it's sad. It's a sad situation, and healthcare is expensive in the United States. And so, how do you break down that barrier? Because I even think about like you had mentioned Amazon, right? That Amazon experience. Well, I can't remember what it is I bought. It was reasonably expensive, and Amazon, right when I went to buy it, they actually said, "Do you want to finance this in 3 easy payments?" Like right there on my screen. And if I just would have pushed that button, I could have done 3 payments of $25 or whatever it was. Do we offer that in healthcare? Because I think there is that barrier where even in our heads we think, I just can't afford $1,000 bill right now, and yet I have this acute situation and my quality of life is suffering. So I would say that that's another area for sure that providers need to really look and figure out, how can we help people pay for these services?
Right, and that's a very, very complex issue, but it's a massive barrier that can't be ignored. That has to, I don't know if it's on the payer front or the provider front, or like my dentist that has his own health insurance policy. You pay $600 and you get XYZ covered, and other things are reduced, and it works. So
Yeah.
while you and I are talking, I'm thinking about friend of mine who is just having his first experience with having insurance at work and going to see the doctor, and he has insurance, and then he went to the doctor, and then he still got a bill, and he was all up in arms that he got a bill. And I said, well, welcome to healthcare today. You
Yeah.
really thought it was going to be 100% covered? No.
Well, what's interesting too, and this could go, I don't want to go too far off topic, but there's even just this idea of misaligned incentives in healthcare, very much so. And so recently, I actually injured my foot a little bit, and I thought maybe I had broken a small bone in my pinky toe, right? So nothing too catastrophic, but anyway, so I went in
Really
to have
painful.
them check my foot. And this was just early this week. And I'm on a high deductible health plan here at class. And so I haven't met my deductible. It's February, so I haven't even got that. And so they said to me, do you want to do an x-ray? And he had felt my foot and said, yeah, I don't think it's broken. I think he just did a number on it, sprained, whatever. And I actually said, no, I did not want an x-ray. And the only reason I did that is because I didn't want to have to pay for that right then. And I remember leaving going, isn't that weird that I have health insurance and I chose not to get a diagnostic, because in my head, I just didn't want to end up paying that bill when it came. Now, if I would have hit my deductible, I would have said, oh, 100%, do two x-rays. Let's get to the bottom of this, right? And let's spend somebody else's, yeah, let's spend somebody else's money. That whole thing is really messy, and it's something that we've got to try to figure out long-term.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thank you for those insights. We have a question from one of our attendees. They say, we're struggling with quickly verifying insurance and benefits coverage on time so that we can schedule the patient for their appointment. Our system claims to provide it, but a lot of times we still need to call the payer. Do you see other providers going through this?
Yeah, I'd like to know a little bit more about that as far as the volume of how much that's happening. It shouldn't be happening a lot, but if in those situations that are, I would say, outliers with the type of coverage, the type of service that's being rendered or those kind of things, that can happen. One of the biggest challenges that we have when you look at the relationships between the payer and the provider is the ever-changing regulations or the ever-changing requirements that payers have in all of these areas, and plans are changing all of the time. And it is almost an unfair situation that providers are in to try to stay on top of that. In fact, I've even thought of starting my own business about like being a conduit of every change that's coming from every plan so that providers could like find that, because one service that's paid today might not be getting paid tomorrow. So the answer, based on the information I have, is yes, other providers do have that. It is a source of frustration. I think that's why we see a proliferation of automation tools, because of the staffing crunch and staff burnout and staff turnover. Anything that you can use from a technology standpoint to offset that, people are going to do. But at the end of the day, there is still just that pick and shovel work of calling payers, and it's unfortunate, but it is there.
So another question we have is, the practice does have a patient portal, but they don't have other mobile access for their patients. And what's the first step that they would take to actually start to make that change for the practice?
Yeah, super. I love that question. That's great. Most organizations actually do have that portal. So then from there, it's okay. What's next? I don't know if this is a shameless plug for class, but providers all
Go ahead, it's your time.
Providers actually have free access to our website. I don't know if people knew that. We do have a paywall. The only thing that we ask is that you've taken at least one evaluation for any product that you're using in the course of a year, and then you'll have free access to our website for a full year. You can reach out through our website. You can email me. I can get you set up and get you access right away to our website. But the point is, we have segments in there about, with all of these tools, all of the vendors, how your peers across the country have scored those vendors in those areas. We don't sell on behalf of any of the vendors. We don't push any product, because you'd still want to go through an RFP. You'd still want, the vendors are the experts in how to roll out new software and what feature functionality you need. That's not really our role. Our role is to say, hey, here's the vendors that are doing a good job. So I would perhaps start there. And we just did a report last year that's just, I don't know, there's dozens of vendors in there and how they perform, and actually the functionality of what they provide. And so that's available to you for free as well.
Much time left, but before we have to go, I wanted to ask you another question. Do you think that, and this really goes to your experience inside, healthcare as well, do you really think that the bigger part of this problem is the philosophy behind it, or actually finding the technology to make this available to patients?
And you said the philosophy of a digital front door. Sorry, can you just explain?
Right. Is it really a philosophy issue with culture and how the physicians always have practiced? Because we're not just talking about physicians who are on the edge of retirement. We're talking about some physicians who have just come out of med school and they're going into practices. So, but is it a philosophy of the practice that is a barrier, or is it just the burden of the technology?
Yeah. So these are generalized statements that I'm about to make. Generally speaking, I'm a big believer that technology is really it's just a tool, right? And that tool has to fit nicely in a workflow, and it has to do a very specific function. And that function has to be key to what it is you're trying to do. So if you think about all of our technology, our iPhones or whatever we're using, we're all using it to solve a certain problem at a certain point of time, whether that's taking a phone call or sending a text or using an app, right? And so when you think about these tools in that regard, then you start to go, hey, this really then fits into a culture or a mindset. So I believe overall, it's that culture mindset. Where it starts to turn on its head a little bit is if the consumer is asking and pushing for more and more robust feature functionality, then it becomes a limiter. And sometimes you can't accomplish certain tasks without this advanced technology. But I think by and large nowadays, it's not necessarily a technology issue. It's the ability for those who are using that technology in a way that then produces a really good outcome. Because at the end of all of this discussion, it's just about an outcome, which is to take care of the consumer, right? And to give them what they need. But also it should take care of the providers too, in a way that it makes their life easier and not harder.
Yeah, that's right. Great points. We have another question. You have time?
Yeah, I do.
Good. Most of the providers offer self-pay discounts for non-preventative visits and non-routine diagnostic testing that is much better than contract rate with the plans. Most patients end up using that option. Why do you think that is happening?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know if I have enough to really probably answer it in a helpful way. I do know that convenience is always going to be a major factor for this. I think, unfortunately, some people make decisions based more on convenience than anything else. I think that's a major driver. And I also think we're just seeing such a proliferation of financial abilities, to pay, that we're starting to just see more and more options that we probably didn't even see even, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. So probably not a great answer to that, but that is becoming more topical for us at Class. We're getting more and more requests around those types of services and plans.
Interesting landscape, isn't it? It's just endlessly fascinating. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for our participants. Those are great questions that you asked. We're happy you were engaged. And Dustin, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. And if there's anything we can do,
you.
Just send me an email and I'll happy to respond.
You bet. Thank you.